Stephen King once said, "I have seen the future of horror, and its name is Clive Barker." That's high praise from one of the greatest horror authors of all time, but Clive Barker is clearly no slouch either. While the majority of the people in the world may not recognize Clive Barker's name like they would Stephen King's, horror fans know Barker and his work well. He's responsible for two great long-running franchises in Hellraiser and Candyman. Starting as a playwright and making around 14 plays, he quickly focused on writing when his short stories started taking off. His first publication was The Books of Blood, a collection of gruesome short stories, many of which would later be adapted to film. Barker was a growing name in the mid-80s, and people started making movies based off his stories. These early attempts were awful, and Barker was so displeased with how they turned out that he took over directing roles for his next movie, Hellraiser. And it was a huge hit, skyrocketing Barker's career as a multi-talented artist and visionary. Pinhead has become one of the most recognizable horror icons, a design that is almost as popular as Freddy, Jason, Michael, and Leatherface. Barker's success, though, would not last long. While the Hellraiser and Candyman series were going strong without Barker behind the camera, the other films Barker directed began to bomb at the box office and were deemed flops among fans. Soon, studios began to look at Barker's work as a financial risk, and decades would pass without any big films being based on his stories. Sure, little projects would pop up from time to time, but no studio wanted to put in serious dollars into something that would probably lose money. So whatever happened to Barker? What happened to the future of horror? His career was looking so bright so early on, but it soon fizzled out. Stephen King is continuing to make box office draws like The Boogeyman, but Clive Barker's name is barely mentioned anymore. Stephen King also wrote this about Barker in the mid-80s. Barker is not merely good, he is great. Not great in the way mainstream critics are liable to appreciate for a good many years. Not great in a way academicians are ever going to like very much, but great in the only way that matters. He doesn't just have the goods, he is the goods. Based on that, maybe the world wasn't ready for Barker, what he represented, or the visions he had. I'm going to take a look back and review all of Barker's feature-length films, the ones he directed and the ones that were inspired by his work. I want a complete understanding of who Barker is as a writer and as a director, and hopefully gain more appreciation for him along the way. I present to you The Fall of Clive Barker, The Films of Blood.
Everyone is a book of blood whenever we are opened or read.
Between 1984 and 1985, Clive Barker came to prominence with his anthology horror books filled with gruesome short stories known as the Books of Blood. Originally a Liverpool playwright, Barker began to dabble in writing horror fiction. He started with some short stories which eventually became the volumes of the Books of Blood. Stephen King read these short stories and said, "I have seen the future of horror, and its name is Clive Barker." From there, Barker never looked back. He kept writing and is now known as a horror legend, but we're kind of skipping too far ahead. Let's take it back to the very beginning. The first short story found within the walls of this anthology, The Books of Blood, is simply titled The Book of Blood. This first story is the catalyst to all the other stories. Without this first short story, we may not have all the other tales of the macabre that we have grown to love. That means no Hellraiser and no Candyman. So what better place to start this month-long search through all of Barker's film adaptations than starting with the story that literally introduced the world to the beautiful and wonderful mind of Clive Barker. Obviously, Barker's filmography did not start with 2009's Book of Blood. In fact, this is rather late in Barker's filmography. But I do think it is important that we cover this one first. Like I said, this story is the catalyst to all his other stories, even ones found outside of the collection of the Books of Blood. Imagine that everything Barker has ever written as a shared universe. Some of his reoccurring characters even meet up in some of his later novels, so the idea of a shared universe is kind of spot on. And this is decades before the film film industry jumped on that trend. Okay, so we get it. The Book of Blood short story is an important stepping stone in Barker's career, but why? And how did they end up turning a short story into a feature-length movie? And is it any good? Well, there's only one way to find out. The Book of Blood starts with a horribly deformed man eating gross-looking eggs and bacon as another man watches from afar. This man is a hitman, and he's been paid to get the skin of the deformed man. The hitman takes the poor soul to a cabin in the middle of nowhere. When he unveils the deformed man, he claims,
"You are a book of blood."
Words and sentences are painstakingly written into the flesh of the younger man. The hitman asks how this came to be. How did these stories wind up on his flesh? The young man reluctantly tells his tale.
The dead have highways that lead to intersections, and intersections that spill into our world.
This one house is deemed haunted, and strange events have taken place in it. A fraud fortune teller was killed while performing seances, and years later, a devil-worshipping girl who held her own seances is abused and her face is ripped off by an unknown force. Both times, the same phrase was written on the wall: "Don't mock us." Paranormal investigator and author Mary and her cameraman/assistant Reg decide to do their next research project on this old house. Mary continues teaching during this time and meets her new student, Simon. Simon is an interesting case. As a kid, Simon foresaw the death of his brother, and everyone claimed he had a special gift. Well, Mary takes him on to be a part of their paranormal investigation in hopes that Simon's gift will be able to help them. They stay many nights at the house, and weird things begin to happen. The cameras go haywire, and writing magically appears on the wall. It's as though the spirits are attacking Simon. One of the more interesting ideas presented in this movie, Mary forms a forbidden connection with Simon. She is his teacher and employer after all, but yet they end up sleeping together. Here's a note to all the teachers and employers out there: don't do that! We know that somehow the spirits will write their tales on Simon's body, but we aren't sure what will lead to that, and I'm not going to spoil it here. Just know that literal ghosts will write their own personal stories into his flesh, and all the tales that are written are then rewritten and translated into Barker's Books of Blood anthology. So these aren't Barker stories in this book, but instead they are tales told by the dead. It's a cool way to say that all of Barker's stories are from ghosts or from deceased people, and all of them have appeared on the flesh of a cursed man. Instead of taking the flesh of a dead person and making a book from it like they do in The Evil Dead, in Barker's universe, the dead make a book out of a living source just to tell their stories. There are a lot of twists and turns throughout the movie, but that's the general idea for this one. I love the idea set forth in the short story and in the movie, but unfortunately execution is all over the place. The movie is far from perfect and barely scratches the surface of Barker's twisted imagination. The word that I would use to describe this one is dull. Everything looks so lifeless. I get it. It was an aesthetic they were going for. Everything on set is painted with different shades of gray, but the color correction in editing is used to dull down the colors even more. Many horror films around the mid to late 2000s had a lifeless color palette, and it's a real shame. At times, there is good contrast. I just wish there was a bit more of it. Direction is solid, being done by John Harrison, who directed some Tales from the Dark Side, Tales from the Crypt, and Creepshow episodes. He also directed the Tales from the Dark Side movie, so he was talented, but Book of Blood almost feels like a cheap TV show at times. Writing is also a bit inconsistent. Really great ideas, but not enough to really develop these characters or make you feel for them. Gore is actually pretty good. Not a ton of it, but the skin of Simon and the first kill are both fantastic. The CGI stuff, on the other hand, is not so good. Some CGI is still really good to this day, but the other bits are awful. This movie cost $6 million to make, and it does not look it. Outside of the CGI bits, Book of Blood looks like a $500,000 movie. $6 million is crazy to get this mediocre of a result. This wasn't even a theatrical release. It was straight to DVD from Lionsgate, and the movie only ended up making about $500,000. So needless to say, it was a huge flop. So, did I like Book of Blood? Actually, I really enjoyed it, but it's not a movie that really stays with you. The idea of ghosts using a human body to write down their stories is a grisly idea and a wonderful springboard to make a collection of short stories, but it doesn't fully work as a movie, in my opinion. But there is a nice little Doug Bradley cameo in this flick, so hardcore Barker fans will be excited about that one. Barker was on a small renaissance in the mid to late 2000s. He was trying to push himself back into relevancy with 3 films that he produced, all getting made within a 2-year window. And this push really didn't have the impact that I'm sure he wanted. As a Barker fan though, I remember being super excited during this time period. It was exciting that Book of Blood was being made and was gonna set up many other film adaptations from his most popular written work. It's a real shame that it didn't lead to more. In fact, this push in the late 2000s was his last real push to get movies made from his stories. Barker would soon fade out of the public eye for over a decade. It wasn't until 2020 when someone else dared to adapt his work again in Hulu's Book of Blood. Yeah, they tried it again, and it's the last Barker film to date. I haven't seen the 2020 version, but I will be reviewing it Halloween night. It's kind of poetic, huh? To start with the Book of Blood, the starting point of Barker's career, and then ending it with the latest Barker movie, The Book of Blood. It's almost like bookends. While Book of Blood started off our month-long look at Clive Barker, as well as starting off his writing career with his first collection of short stories, it was actually 1985's Underworld, also known as Transmutations, that started off his film career. This was Clive Barker's first attempt at writing for film. It wasn't based off of any of his prior works, and for 1985 this would be right around the same time that the Books of Blood was released, so he was just getting famous, or at the very least, on the verge of it. I won't lie, I've never heard of Underworld, but for it being the earliest Clive Barker written film, I'm beyond excited to dive into it. When looking on IMDb, Underworld has less than favorable reviews. But let's be honest, when has a bad review ever stopped me in the past? Let's find out if those reviews are well-founded, or if Underworld is actually an underappreciated gem. Underworld starts in a high-class brothel where we get minutes and minutes of footage where someone just pours champagne into a glass. We do cut back and forth between the brothel and some seedy ninja-esque baddies who are running around outside. The ninjas break into the brothel and kidnap one of the high-class prostitutes named Nicole. The mafia is upset that Nicole was taken. Why are they upset, you may ask? Well, besides one of their favorite girls from their favorite place going missing, their motives become more clear at the end of the film. The mafia hires Roy Bain, a retired private investigator, to find the missing girl. Roy initially refuses, but since he had a past relationship with Nicole, he is forced to take the case. Roy stumbles upon a doctor who saw Nicole frequently. We find out that the doctor has created a euphoric and highly addictive drug. This is the perfect drug, as anyone who takes it will be instantly hooked, but there's a catch. The drug deforms the person beyond recognition. Well, there's a small army of these mutated druggies living in the sewers. It was these mutations that took Nicole and are using her as bait so they can get more drugs from the doctor. The mutants try to inject Nicole with the drug, but she's immune to its effects. Turns out that the mutants aren't so bad after all, and Nicole becomes friends with them.
Welcome to the Underworld.
Who are you?
I'm Nygaard. This is Doodoo.
But my friends call me Shitface.
Well, the mafia want the mutants dead, and we have a climactic battle against mobsters and monsters while Roy tries to save Nicole. Oh boy, where do I even start with this one? Clive Barker met George Pavlou in the mid-80s, and both talked about their interest in film. Barker wanted to obviously write, and Pavlou wanted to direct. Barker wrote a script. Originally, the script was more horror and film noir, but unfortunately, studio execs at the time wanted a more punk rock vibe, and they asked for rewrites. The idea of mobsters versus monsters is a fun one, but you can tell Barker's vision was greatly hindered by studio interference, and this interference is what led Barker to disown the film. It's also interesting to point out the similarities between Underworld and Barker's later film, Nightbreed. The idea of freaks being outcasts of society, but in reality, they are the warm-hearted normal ones. You identify with these monsters and realize that the real monsters are the ones occupying society. Now, I'm sure that there's more of a personal reason Barker plays with these themes often in his work, but I'm not really one to speculate.
What are you doing here?
This is my new home. These are my friends.
Barker would continue to work with director George Pavlou just one more time with 1986's Rawhead Rex, which I'll cover next. Let's just say this point in Barker's film career was rocky at best. Pavlou, while I'm sure is a good guy, didn't do much to elevate the material. Everything is very safe. Acting is rather bland, even though there was talent on screen. It seemed like everyone was just phoning it in. Music is mostly not memorable either. Lighting in the film is on point at times. Some lighting captures eyes or it sets the tone. Some decent colors here and there. Makeup and special effects are mostly cheap looking. However, all the mutants look unique. They look bad, don't get me wrong, but at least you can tell them apart. It's hard to recommend Underworld as it is, but I hear it's getting a 4K release by Kino Lorber sometime in 2024. Now, I believe this is the first English disc that will be released of this one. I know there's a German DVD, but that might be it. So either way, a higher resolution's only going to benefit the viewing experience. I also want to mention that Underworld and Transmutations are slightly different versions of the same movie. There's an additional 15 minutes in Transmutations, and that's the version that I actually watched for this review. Now, I didn't watch both versions and I didn't compare them, so maybe a shortened runtime could actually help the pacing of the movie. I don't know, I'm only speculating. All in all, if you're a diehard Barker fan, you may want to check it out. Just know that studios removed a lot of the horror elements and really undermined Barker. So you still have inklings of his skill, but it feels very removed from his style. Writing a script from scratch didn't work out for Barker, so for his next film project, he adapted one of his short stories found in the Books of Blood. Will Barker's future attempt to work with George Pavlou work out for him, or will it be yet another failure worthy of disowning? Find out on the next episode as we take a look at Rawhead Rex. Welcome back to our month-long look at Clive Barker movies. We just got done looking at Barker's first attempt to transition to the screen with 1985's Underworld, a movie which Barker immediately disowned. Barker dealt with studio executives meddling with his script and changing things for the worst in Underworld. On Barker's second attempt at the big screen, he still continued with Underworld's director George Pavlou, but instead of creating a uniquely original idea for the script, Barker decided to adapt one of his famous short stories to the big screen. I assume he did this to have more say over the final product and to ensure studio execs didn't meddle as much. That, of course, is speculation, but it makes sense. Barker had a proven formula and a growing loving fanbase to back up his vision. So, did 1986's Rawhead Rex renew Barker's faith in cinema? Or was it like Underworld, a film which Barker instantly regretted? This is the story behind Rawhead Rex. Before we dive into the differences between the movie and the short story, and before we talk about how Barker feels about the final film, we should probably talk about what the movie's actually about. Once the movie starts, you'll notice that the opening credits is written in papyrus, and that just makes me laugh. I guess it could have been worse. At least it wasn't Comic Sans. The story begins with an Irish farmer wanting to rid his field of a giant stone monolith so he can properly till the soil and make proper use of his land. Seemingly the stone won't budge, but of course, once he's alone, the stone monolith begins to move and thick fog is unleashed. This is a tomb, or maybe a prison of sorts, and within it lies Rawhead Rex, an immortal being older than Christ. He's a pagan god of sorts, and with the monolith removed, he is free. And he is right. Rawhead Rex is supposed to be the embodiment of man's desire. He is the primal id of the male ideology, power-hungry, aggressive, sexual, and feral. In the book, Rawhead Rex was described as a very tall, thin, phallic-looking creature. Yeah, he was supposed to resemble a giant penis. I guess that brings home the embodiment of the primal male id. When making the movie, they were on a time crunch. They secured funding in February and had to begin filming in March, so of course there wasn't much time to design the creature. This was in the days before CGI, so the creature was designed in 2 phases. There was to be a life cast for the actor to wear, but also an animatronic head for close-up shots. Peter Litton, who was in charge of the special makeup effects, stated that he didn't want to make a giant penis.
Rawhead Rex should look like an enormous cock. I didn't think audiences were necessarily ready for an 8-foot cock dancing around.
So instead, tried to draw inspiration from Celtic gods. They decided to bulk out Rawhead Rex because finding a tall, skinny guy would be hard to do in a week. So this is the Rawhead we got, which is very different than Barker's vision. While I love this design, I mean, it's such an interesting looking monster, I don't love the design for Rawhead. If this was some other property, I would be enamored by the design, but for Rawhead Rex proper, I hate it. They totally missed the mark on this one. While Rawhead Rex is out stalking people throughout the small village countryside, Howard, an American historian, is visiting this small church. Howard believes that some ancient churches were built on top of holy ground. Before Christ, when pagan gods were worshipped, some events would happen and they were deemed holy, so churches were built on the ground. Howard is investigating the church and sees this really cool ancient stained glass window. It has glowing red laser eyes, but it seems a piece of glass is missing from the very top. Howard, his wife, and 2 children have only been in Ireland for a month or so, but already the kids have thick Irish accents.
Shut up!
It's very strange indeed, since the parents have typical American English accents. I heard a rumor that they're not actually their kids.
It's a vicious rumor.
The next scene, Howard and his wife are walking around, and here we get a small horror movie cameo with this lady in the red coat.
She reminds me of something. Somebody.
You're telling me, lady. I saw Don't Look Now too, and who could forget the dwarf at the end? Rawhead goes around killing people in some pretty fun and gruesome ways. All the while, a priest sees visions of Rawhead. The priest begins to worship this ancient deity, and towards the end of the film, the priest gets baptized by Rawhead Rex. And how does one get baptized by a god that represents the primal urges of man? With a golden shower, of course. And the priest loves it. Sicko. We're about to get into spoilers for this old movie, so if you don't want to be spoiled, you can click away now. You've been warned. While leaving town with his family, Howard has to stop the car to let his little girl use the restroom behind some bushes. Mom and Dad have to go with her, and they leave the son alone in the car. Well, Rawhead Rex shows up to the car, and even though the dad tries, his son is killed. This makes Howard on a personal vendetta to stop Rawhead Rex. Using his knowledge of ancient times, he's able to conclude that the piece missing from the stained glass window actually foretells the downfall of Rawhead. Apparently, Rawhead Rex existed before Christ, but was able to be locked away with a stone idol. Howard finds the idol in the church and tries to use it, but it doesn't work. Well, what can stop a giant phallic representation of the feralness of man? The womb of a mother.
A woman.
The only thing more powerful than man is woman, for woman can create life, and men can only destroy it. So that was Rawhead Rex, and if you forget about Barker and you forget about the original story, then the movie itself is fine. It's not amazing by any means, but there's an interesting and unique monster, decent blood and gore, lots of kills, memorable moments like the pea baptism and the murder of a child. It has positive elements for sure, but it's not perfect. The monster looks so goofy in wide shots. It never actually meets the eye line of anyone and looks like a giant prosthetic mask on a tall, muscular man's head. It's goofy, but fun. I'd love to watch a sports game with Rawhead. Go team, go! Yay! Rawhead looks best in close-ups when they use the animatronic head. This looks great. When comparing the movie to the short story, while certain story beats are still there, the movie feels very vanilla. It's very plain. Performances are okay, but nothing amazing.
My God, there's something there back in the field.
The priest really goes over the top, and I can't tell if it's silly or brilliant.
Wants to baptize you. Rawhead!
Maybe both. Everyone else just feels a little dull. As I said in my previous review, director George Pavlou is probably a great guy, but I don't think he elevates a film. He's not a bad director, but it doesn't feel like he has much of a vision. It feels like he would excel as maybe a television director, but he might not have what it takes to be a film director. While the movie takes little liberties with Barker's idea and script, it fails to capture the essence of his work. Everything in the script is technically in the movie, but none of the meaning or implications are attached, and it makes it feel lifeless. Rawhead Rex is still a fantastic story, but the movie doesn't really do it justice. I don't say this often, but it could really use a remake. Barker didn't like this film either.
Disliked both of them fiercely.
In fact, he was so disgusted with what had become of his work that he didn't trust others to touch his stories for years. In fact, these early experiences led Barker to say, "Fine, I'll do it myself." And what would come next would cement Barker as a horror legend forever. So in a weird way, we have Underworld and Rawhead Rex to thank for horror movie history. So join me Thursday as we're about to raise some hell. After writing 2 scripts that were eventually made into terrible movies, Barker was faced with a challenge. It was make it or break it for him. He had success in writing, as his Books of Blood anthology were monumental, and it propelled him into the limelight, but his movie career, on the other hand, had faltered horribly. Barker wanted just one more attempt, one more chance to get things right. Instead of having someone else make films based off of his work, he was going to take the directing chair and have final say on his next project. This would become Hellraiser. But what would the film be about? In Underworld, Barker's first picture, he made an original screenplay specifically for the film. In Rawhead Rex, he adapted one of his successful short stories for the screen. For Hellraiser, he did a little bit of both. He wrote a novella called The HellBound Heart, but as he was writing it, he was also penning the screenplay. Both novella and screenplay were made conjointly. Barker shipped his idea overseas to America, where he found success funding the film on the very first investor he asked, New World Pictures, owned by the notorious and impactful Roger Corman. So with a script in hand, funding in place, and an experienced film crew around him, Barker was to direct his first feature film, Hellraiser. Any non-horror fan that looks at Pinhead automatically recognizes him as one of the great slasher villains like Freddy or Jason, but Hellraiser isn't a slasher film. It's actually closer to a modern-day, messed-up, grim fairy tale. You have the innocent young heroine, the evil stepmother, and something dark and sinister driving the force behind the scenes. It's about the power of desire and what one is willing to do for the things they think they want. Hellraiser is a love story at the end of the day, with fantastical elements sprinkled throughout. It's uniquely original in that regard.
At its core, Hellraiser is a love story, telling the story of forbidden love and lust within a family threatened with turbulent domestic relationships.
The film starts with Frank at a foreign market buying a little puzzle box. Now this is actually a set, and if you would just pan the camera a couple inches to either side, you'd see the edge of the set. So the set was super small. Frank takes the puzzle box home and begins to play with it, trying to open it. Well, he does open it, and all hell breaks loose. Now I figured this little puzzle box would try to hook you, but I didn't know it'd be like this. We get our first glimpse of the Cenobites in their realm, and wow! They have cut up and torn off Frank's face. The torn up face of Frank was actually a failed practical effect. It was meant to melt into the floor, which makes sense of how Frank ends up under the floorboards later, but the effect didn't really work. They did keep in the puzzle piece face in the final film, but they cut from it early so you don't see the melting. We are then introduced to Frank's brother Larry and his wife Julia. They are moving into the house where Frank had been staying. You can tell right away that Julia is a bit distant towards her husband Larry, for reasons we will soon find out. The film was pretty much shot in order. There were a few sets that they used, like the foreign shop, the hospital, the labyrinth, and a few shots of the attic, but the house that they shoot in is an actual house. According to Ashley Lawrence, the house was so cheap to use because apparently there was a past incident where someone gassed themselves in the house. Yikes. Speaking of Ashley Lawrence, she plays Larry's daughter Kirsty, who doesn't live with them but visits from time to time as she's an adult now and on her own. We find out through flashbacks that Julia had an affair with Larry's brother Frank. It was a bit rapey, but that's all Julia can think about, and she longs for him. As the movers bring the bed upstairs, Larry cuts his hand on a rusty nail. He isn't a fan of blood and brings his bleeding hand up to the attic to find Julia. Blood drips onto the floor, which will eventually resurrect Frank. This resurrection scene was actually added near the end of filming. Originally, it was written and shot very plainly, thinking they didn't have the budget to make something elaborate. The script called for the blood to seep into the floor, then they take Larry to the hospital, and then Frank's skinless body would appear later in the attic. New World Pictures was super excited for Hellraiser as they were seeing the dailies in LA. New World Pictures thought they had a franchise on their hands, their very own version of Freddy or Jason. So they gave an extra $25,000 to add the resurrection scene, and what a scene it is! It's one of the highlights of the film for sure. A lot of reverse photography and melty, waxy gore. I love it, and fans do too. Well, Julia stumbles upon the skinless Frank in the attic, and at first she's appalled, but once she realizes it's Frank, feelings come flooding back. Frank needs more blood in order for him to gain strength and fully resurrect. He needs Julia to kill for him. After some thought, she agrees to help her lover.
Yes, I will.
That night, our lead Kirsty has a terrible nightmare with feathers and a bloody sheet. This was inspired by Dario Argento's Suspiria. Julia goes to the local bar during the day looking for men to bring home. These men think they'll be able to get inside of Julia, but they don't realize that the person waiting in the shadows wants inside of them. During the scene with the hammer, they originally had 3 on-screen hits, with one shot being a close-up of the skull as the hammer hit it. But of course the NPAA said that this was too excessive. They said 1 hit is fine, but the second and third hit are a bit sadistic. Barker jokingly thinks that the first hit would also be sadistic, but what does he know? After draining the blood, Frank has become a lot stronger and more put together, but he still needs more. Julia, although distraught by the murder, is all in on her desire for Frank. While at work at the pet shop, Kirsty meets a hobo face to face. Now, Barker originally wanted to play the hobo who eats the crickets in the pet shop, but because of how behind they were and how short of a shoot it was, he didn't have time to go through the elaborate makeup process. It's a real shame though, because those crickets look yummy. Kirsty goes to visit her father and Julia, but here's something in the attic. Frank is feeding on another poor hapless sap that Julia brought over when he runs into Kirsty. Through some dialogue, Kirsty finds out that this skinless mess is her Uncle Frank. If you couldn't already tell, Frank is a total creep and wants to have sex with his niece. Kirsty is feisty though and kicks him in the balls and grabs his stupid box. She tosses it through the window and escapes, picking up the box on her way out. The next thing she knows is that she wakes up in a hospital. She has to warn her father, but the hospital staff makes her wait. As she waits, she plays with the puzzle box and unlocks it. Now here is the true showstopper in the movie. She meets the engineer, a creature that often has people behind it, pushing it through a paper-thin labyrinth. We also meet all the other Cenobites. There's the lead Cenobite, played by Doug Bradley, a lifelong friend of Barker's. Doug Bradley actually had the option to either play a mover role, where he could show his face, or a lead Cenobite role, where he would be covered in makeup. As an up-and-coming actor, he thought if future casting directors could see his actual face in the movie, it would be better for his career, but he ultimately chose Pinhead. Pinhead was the nickname for the lead Cenobite, and one that Barker didn't particularly like. but the name stuck. We also have the female Cenobite, who's a girl, and that's basically like her main characteristic. Apparently the actress hated looking like that and wouldn't return to the sequel because of how ugly it made her look. We also have Butterball, who's the surgeon of the group. And don't forget the fan favorite, the Chatterer, who is basically the group's pet. Originally, the Chatterer was to have pointed teeth, as well as hunching over and acting like a monkey. The chattering teeth was inspired by monkeys, but they thought the posture and the sharp teeth took away from the human element. I freaking love the Cenobites and the elegantness of them. They are demons, yet they're so regal. They don't torture for the sake of it. People seek them out, seek out their pleasures, seek out their pain. Cenobites merely provide a service. Kirsty is a smart girl and reminds these Hell Angels that Frank escaped their clutches and that she can bring them to him. Can Kirsty escape the clutches of the Cenobites? Will her father be okay? What is to happen to Julia and Frank? And who made all these weird lightning effects at the end of the film? I'm not going to answer the questions and spoil the film, but let's talk about those lightning effects. Well, they ran out of time and they ran out of money, so they couldn't work on the special effects at the end, so Barker had to go to a special effects studio in Greece. Barker got drunk on Greek beer and hand animated all the electricity at the end of the film by himself. Hellraiser is one of my favorite horror films, and I first saw it when I was relatively new to the genre. I had seen A Nightmare on Elm Street when I was around 11 to 12 years old. I skipped Jason movies, I skipped Michael Myers, I went straight to the Hellraiser series. I fell in love with Clive Barker, and I remember getting the HellBound heart for Christmas when I was about 13 years old. And I'm not the only one who loves this movie. Hellraiser was super successful and pushed Barker into stardom. Not only was he a famous author, he now broke into the film business, and his gamble paid off. Big time. He made a classic horror film, and of course, the pressure was on to make another. At the time of making Hellraiser, Barker was not happy with the state of the horror film landscape in the mid to late 80s.
If you are talking about a movie which is solely based upon Psychos on the Loose, for instance, the Jason movies, the Friday the 13th pictures, in which you take vulnerable teenagers and you just kill them one by one with machetes or whatever else, I think that's unhealthy. I don't write Psycho on the Loose stories.
While he loved the first Nightmare on Elm Street, he thought the sequels made Krueger into a culture hero. Fans and audiences loved Freddy and Jason, but Barker hated that. He didn't like audiences cheering or being entertained by the murdering of innocent kids on screen.
The Nightmare on Elm Street pictures, I must say, that make kind of heroes or culture heroes of the man in the mask, the man with the machete. Those pictures actually get cheers for the murderers.
Barker was more of a fan of fantastical horror, which contained deep-rooted metaphors for the human psyche. While the original Hellraiser still holds Barker's standards for this, unfortunately, Pinhead would rise to fame and be celebrated by fans, much to Barker's dismay. Hellraiser went on to have 10 sequels, with the most recent one coming out in 2022. After a decade after Hellraiser was released, Barker was tired of talking about it.
This is the last time I will talk about that son of a bitch movie.
He no longer felt like it was his own and had nothing left to say. He felt like, if anything, it had become Doug Bradley's baby, as he was the one constant throughout all the films at the time. Barker would later go on to add to the Hellraiser mythos by writing the Scarlet Gospels in 2015, which starred Pinhead versus Harry D'Amour, his main character in many of his stories, and in the film Lord of Illusions. Barker didn't have a ton to do with the Hellraiser sequels, so I'm not going to be covering them this month. But if you need to know what I think of them in the meantime, here's a quick little rundown. 2 is a horror masterpiece. 3 is a huge fall from grace. 4 is a guilty pleasure and has its moments. 5 is pretty good, even though it wasn't a Hellraiser script originally. 6 is fair, even though it wasn't a Hellraiser script originally. 7 is not great and wasn't a Hellraiser script originally. 8 is stupid fun, but wasn't a Hellraiser script originally. I haven't seen any of the sequels past Hellworld, but probably should. So, after the major success of Hellraiser, how did Barker respond? After the huge success of Hellraiser, Clive Barker had cemented himself as a horror legend. He was a world-celebrated horror author and one of the hottest new horror directors around. He had struck gold with Pinhead and Company, and pressure was on to repeat that success. Directly after Hellraiser, Barker helped pen the script for Hellraiser 2, HellBound in 1988, but we're not covering that one as Barker took more of a backseat role with that franchise. Barker was also busy in 1988 writing and releasing a short novel by the name Cabal. Cabal was an interesting story as it dealt with elements and themes that Barker briefly touched on in his 1985 script Underworld. Well, Barker would adapt Cabal into a script, and it would be his sophomore directing outing and his follow-up to the massive successful hit Hellraiser. Barker found funding for his next project with another American film company, this time with relative newcomer Morgan Creek Entertainment. While Hellraiser was made with a budget of roughly $2 million, Barker was given a huge budget of $11 million to work on his Cabal adaptation, which would eventually be known as Nightbreed. This was to be Barker's grandest, most ambitious film yet. He kept on much of the cast and crew of his previous movies like Hellraiser, had a great story to adapt, had all the money in the world, and he had grown as a director. He was set up for success, but success is never a guarantee. Even with all the odds in one's favor, there is always a chance of failure. And just like Icarus flying too close to the sun, Nightbreed is sadly a tale of failed ambition. Before we dive into why Nightbreed is considered a failure, we should probably talk about the plot. But there's the rub. What version of Nightbreed do we talk about? Should I review the theatrical cut, the Cabal cut, or the director's cut? What's the big deal, I hear you asking? The different versions probably just have a few frames of added gore or nudity, maybe a scene or two that was cut from the original film due to pacing, like most director's cuts or unrated cuts. Right? Wrong. All three versions are very different from one another, and we'll talk about some of the differences later, but trust me when I say, this film had a rough past. Since this is a month-long retrospective on Clive Barker and his films, I've decided to review the director's cut of Nightbreed since this was Barker's original vision. So, if you saw the film in the 90s or early 2000s, some scenes and themes may feel a bit different, but bear with me. Nightbreed begins with a whimsical dream sequence of flashes of monsters running throughout a graveyard approaching the cemetery gate. Aaron Boone wakes up from this dream with his girlfriend Lori beside him. We find out that this is a reoccurring dream about Midian, a dark place full of monsters, and this dream has given Boone anxiety and problems in the past. Boone had seen his psychiatrist, Dr. Decker, about these dreams, but Boone feels like he's better now. Well, psychiatrist Dr. Decker has been calling Boone non-stop, and when Boone eventually visits the doctor again, shit hits the fan. The police have contacted Dr. Decker about some murders and wondered if any of his patients were capable of such an act. There is a masked killer going around murdering families. Decker thinks it was Boone. Decker doesn't want to believe it, but knows Boone has mentioned these families and homes during his hypnotic sessions. Boone has described these incidents clearly in his sleep, and Decker has it all on tape. Decker is a nice guy. He gives Boone some drugs and tells him to go to the police. Boone is torn up about the thought of being a killer, and we get a few scenes that weren't in the theatrical cut. Boone burns every trace of himself with pictures of him and Lori on the bed. He then travels to the nightclub where Lori is performing and cries while he watches her. He goes to the highway and jumps in front of a semi, but somehow survives. While in the hospital, he hears a man talking to himself. This is Narcissus, and he knows about Midian too, this magical land of monsters and beasts that live beyond death. Narcissus thinks Boone was sent by Midian to see if he was worthy, so Narcissus cuts off his own face. Cool. Boone escapes the hospital as Decker chases after him with the police. Boone is able to find Midian with Narcissus' directions, but it's just a hodgepodge of map paintings, location, and soundstage. Boone falls asleep and is woken up by monsters. Through some quick dialogue, we find out that Boone never killed anyone. The monsters are forbidden to eat humans, but Peliquin takes a bite out of Boone.
I want meat. Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
As Boone runs away from the monsters, he runs into Decker and the police. Decker claims Boone has a gun, and the police open fire on him, leaving Boone dead. After they take his body to the morgue, that magical bite starts working, and Boone escapes off the slab and runs back to Midian. Laurie is torn up about all of this and tries to chase after him. Turns out that the Nightbreed live in Midian. It's a race of monsters that have been shunned by the outside world. They live in peace and have formed a friendly society. Boone joins forces with the Nightbreed while Laurie continues to look for him. And who's that on Laurie's tail? None other than the masked slasher. I don't want to give away too much, but the film ends with mankind wanting to kill all the monsters of Midian because they are viewed as outsiders. Society wants a mass extinction of anything that isn't their own kind. As you can see, there's a lot of underlying themes found throughout Nightbreed, and audiences are supposed to side with the monsters. As a film company though, how do you market that? I mean, monsters aren't supposed to be sympathetic, they're not supposed to be interesting. Plus, we're barely out of the 80s. And you know what was popular in the 80s? Slasher movies. Oh, the logic of studio executives. Yes, there was a masked killer, but it was never supposed to be the focal point of the film. Sort of like how the Cenobites in Hellraiser aren't the main focal point in that movie either. The masked killer in Nightbreed and the Cenobites in Hellraiser are more of a catalyst to help progress the story, merely a tool to get the plot going. Well, you know studios, they demanded reshoots and added extra scenes to showcase the masked killer more and to build up the violence of the Nightbreed, which just goes to show that studio execs had no faith in the original themes. Barker was furious with the studio interference, and he saw his beloved project slowly slip from his fingers. With a theatrical cut as it was, Barker couldn't even defend his work. None of the actors or crew members liked the theatrical cut. The brilliance of the script was gone, the love of the characters had disappeared, and all that was left was a fantastical mess that barely resembled Barker's vision. Nightbreed was deemed a flop and only made roughly $8 to $16 million. Fans eventually became aware of the studio's interference, and Nightbreed slowly became a cult favorite. Some hardcore horror fans were able to track down some footage that was thought to be lost of Barker's original idea, and they made a new version of the film. This new version had the DVD release of Nightbreed with the VHS inserts cut into it, and it was known as the Cabal Cut. Almost every shot made it into the Cabal Cut, which made it unnecessarily bloated. Well, in 2014, the good folks at Scream Factory helped find all the missing camera negatives, and Barker was given a chance to make a director's cut for the very first time. He could correct all his wrongs. This cut would help heal the wounds of failure. 45 unseen minutes were added to the director's cut, but 25 minutes of the theatrical cut was taken out, so it's only 20 minutes longer than the theatrical cut. And what a difference the director's cut makes! It's actually watchable now. Yeah, I was never the biggest fan of Nightbreed, but let me defend myself. As a sophomore in high school, I was unaware of the movie, but I read the novel Cabal for a book report. I loved it so much that I got permission to make a movie of Cabal instead of writing a report, and so I made a short film based on the first few chapters. My little film ended once Boone was shot dead at Midian. I used dialogue verbatim from the book, and here's a scene of the masked killer. Can't use the volume though because I used a ton of copyrighted songs. Well, I found out about the movie while I was filming my own, and I watched it once mine was finished. I didn't love it. I felt like the movie lost a lot of the power the novel had. This was my first time watching the director's cut, and the film is significantly better. Is it perfect? Far from it, but at least it's enjoyable now. I think I spoiled myself with a much better novel first. Same thing happened with The Shining for me. And that's why you don't read, you just watch movies, folks. If you're a fan of Barker, then you'll recognize a lot of familiar faces. There's Doug Bradley, of course, who played Pinhead, Simon Bamford, who played Butterball, and Nicholas Vince, who played the Chatterer. Barker was also a huge fan of David Cronenberg's work.
One of the greatest horror movie makers in the world, David Cronenberg.
So we had him play Dr. Decker, which is pretty awesome. Cronenberg actually gives a pretty great performance for not being an actor. And Bobby also had a heck of a performance. She looked so familiar to me, so I looked up what she was in. Oh, she was in Happiness? This one's disturbing. Don't watch it. Craig Sheffer does an okay job, but he comes across as unpolished in this one. Maybe he wasn't given enough to work with, but I'm just not a fan of him in Nightbreed. Funny though, because I loved him in another Barker-esque movie, Hellraiser 5. Makeup was done by longtime collaborator Bob Keane, and holy crap, there are so many awesome monster designs. The imagination is through the roof. I love Lylesburg, Baphomet, Peloquin, but my favorite is Shauna Sassy. Shauna Sassy actually has a lot in relation to Pinhead. Originally, when Clive would draw the Hell Priest Pinhead, he drew him with quills. Well, there was no way they could do an elaborate suit in Hellraiser due to the limited budget, so they settled with pins for him. So it's great to see the design returning and in such an iconic way. Speaking of the monsters and of Midian, Nightbreed is arguably more impactful now than ever before. I was gonna say there's a lot of themes about empowering minorities, but that's not really the case. It's more about acceptance and humanizing all minorities. And that's an important lesson in today's world. Even if you've never been outcast by your gender, race, sexuality, identity, we can all relate to these themes and learn that every person is just that. We are all humans going through life on our own journey together. Life is about not only accepting your own journey, but having respect and accepting everyone else's. Nightbreed is less of a film about horrific images and scary scenes, but more of a fantastical look into a fantasy world where the true monsters are the ones who look back at you in your mirror. The true monsters are the ones who dictate the rules of a society, the ones who forge and force ideas based on fear, not facts, the ones we see surrounding us every day. Those are the true monsters, and when put like that, maybe that fantasy world is a bit easier to believe. The failure of Nightbreed would put Barker's directing career on halt. Instead, he would hand off the reins for his next project. And oh boy, is that next one sweet. Urban legends, the modern day folklore, passed down from person to person, usually highlighting horrific, unlikely events with a twist ending told from a distant yet seemingly reputable source. Yeah, it's a true story. It happened to my sister's best friend's cousin. Urban legends are relatively new, with the phrase gaining traction with the rise of media and the internet. The term urban legends became popular with 1981's publication of The Vanishing Hitchhiker: American Urban Legends and Their Meanings, a book by American folklorist Jan Harold Brunvind. Of course, modern day urban legends snuck their way into horror films well before this. You have movies based on certain urban legends like When a Stranger Calls in 1979 and Alligator in 1980. But it wasn't until 1992 when we got a movie that focused on the idea of urban legends and what their impact on a community could be. This movie, of course, is Candyman. Candyman started as a short story written by the one and only Clive Barker titled The Forbidden. The Forbidden was in the later parts of the Books of Blood and was released in 1985. Many scholars have looked into The Forbidden and its connection to urban legends and thought Clive Barker had to have done research regarding these modern day folk tales in order to capture it so well. But Clive was oblivious to urban legends and the ideas of them. The Forbidden stemmed from a conversation he had with his grandmother when he was roughly 4 years old. She told him to avoid public bathrooms, for grown men could do really bad things to young little boys. This fear grew and developed into The Forbidden. When Clive Barker was filming Nightbreed at Pinewood Studios, another director by the name of Bernard Rose was filming another movie at the same studio lot. Both cordially met for lunch, introduced themselves, and became good friends. Bernard later bought the Books of Blood in respect for his new friend and fell in love with the stories found within, specifically The Forbidden. When Bernard Rose approached Barker about adapting the short story to film, Barker had full trust in Rose. Barker saw Rose's artistic vision and played a hands-off approach. Barker signed away the rights and became executive producer for Candyman, a rare instance when signing away one of his stories turned out to be a major success. But I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's slow it down and talk about one of my childhood favorites. This is Candyman. The story revolves around grad student Helen and her best friend Bernadette researching urban myths. They stumble upon the myth of Candyman, which has been terrorizing lower income families in the Chicago area. If you say his name in the mirror 5 times, he will be summoned behind you and he will kill you. Both Helen and Bernadette want to find the origins of the urban legend, but also want to find the origins of the legend within the very community. As the legend goes, Candyman was a painter in the 1800s who fell in love with the daughter of a wealthy racist. When the town found out that Candyman had impregnated the woman, they freaked out and decided to put the law in their own hand and kill the Candyman. They cut off the painting hand and replaced it with a rusty hook. They slathered honeycomb all over him, and the beast stung him to death. His corpse was burned right where the poor neighborhood was eventually built. The deeper Helen digs, the worse things get. Candyman is such a phenomenal film that I don't want to spoil anything beyond that. Candyman is a classic horror film and one of the best from the early 90s. Performances are all top-notch. Tony Todd has cemented himself as one of the best slasher villains of all time and a true icon of the genre. Virginia Madsen is also phenomenal. Whenever she sees Candyman, she has this hypnotic glazed look, and it turns out that she was actually hypnotized during those scenes. Bernard Rose would hypnotize her every day before filming. These sessions did play a toll on Virginia, and after a long day of shooting, she forgot everything that happened that day. Direction by Bernard Rose is exquisite. He totally understands and gets Barker. Yes, Rose did change a lot about Barker's short story, like character names, races, and location, but at the root of it all, Rose held true. Barker has a way of making fantastical stories that deal more with the human condition rather than the fantastical events. Barker humanizes the experience in almost a romantic sense, and I think Rose holds true to that. The score also aids to this vision. Rose wanted Philip Glass to do the music, thinking they could never get him to do it, but they ended up getting Philip Glass to do it, and what we get isn't your typical horror flick score. It's romantic, sad, but beautiful and haunting. It's the icing on the cake. Candyman, much like Barker's Nightbreed, is somewhat of a sympathetic villain looking not for revenge, but instead for love. Candyman may not necessarily be the monster, but instead, how he was treated and how the myth continues is possibly the bigger villain. These are themes that I'm noticing a lot in Barker's work. Candyman was a huge success, so of course studios wanted more. They asked Rose to come up with a sequel. Rose wanted to make a spiritual successor of sorts about myths and legends and what they mean to people in a culture. Rose wanted to adapt The Midnight Meat Train, a short story found in Barker's Books of Blood anthology, and wanted to set it in London. Rose wanted to mix in elements of Jack the Ripper. Some of the movie would focus on Jack the Ripper in the 1880s, while the other parts of the movie would take place in present-day London, and the third act would focus on the Midnight Meat Train. Barker was hesitant about this as he thought the Midnight Meat Train could make a standalone feature. Studios hated the idea. They wanted their own Freddy or Jason, so they went their own route. Candyman spawned 2 direct sequels in the 90s and a sequel in 2021 that takes place directly after the first one, which was headed by Jordan Peele. I enjoyed Farewell to the Flesh immensely, and Day of the Dead is fine, neither compared to the original. Now, I haven't seen the 2021 requel, but from what I hear, it's pretty good. I'll have to check it out one of these days. Next in the Clive Barker timeline would be his last directed film, Lord of Illusions. It was his last attempt at directing after the failure of Nightbreed, and let's just say, it put his film career on hiatus for quite a bit. I've already covered Lord of Illusions many years ago, and while I cringe at my editing and performance, some parts still hold up. I don't want to rehash any old ground, so if you want to know my thoughts on Lord of Illusion, check out the video. Next week, I'm going to dive into some of the made-for-TV horror movies that Barker had a hand with, and after that, I'm going to dive into Barker's last attempt at turning his stories to the screen. Clive Barker exploded on the horror directing scene with the uber-successful Hellraiser and seemed like such a promising young talent in that field, but not even a decade later, 1995's Lord of Illusions put an end to Barker's directing career. Misstep after misstep through studio interference and personal blunders led studios to have little faith in Barker. While the Hellraiser series and the Candyman series were going strong in the 90s, Barker didn't do much of note in the film world during this time. While Barker tried to get some film projects off the ground, like The Thief of Always, nothing really gained much traction. During this hiatus, Barker stayed busy by working on a video game, writing, working with Marvel Comics, painting, and being a producer on an Academy Award-winning film. That film was Gods and Monsters. Gods and Monsters is a period drama about James Whale, the director of Frankenstein. Barker had a deep connection with the project as he identified with James Whale. Both were gay British horror directors, and Barker just felt compelled to produce it. So, after 1995's Lord of Illusion, Barker was relatively quiet in the film world for almost a decade, outside of being a producer. But while the film side of Barker's career lay dormant, the television side of things was slowly heating up. Kind of. The next 4 movies that Barker's name was attached to were made-for-TV movies: Quicksilver Highway, Saint Sinner, and 2 episodes of The Masters of Horror. We're going to be looking at Quicksilver Highway today, and on Tuesday we're going to look at Saint Sinner. I'm not going to be covering the Masters of Horror episodes this month in October because I don't own Valerie on the Stairs, and Heckle's Tale won't make it past YouTube censorship. 1997's Quicksilver Highway was a made-for-TV movie directed by Mick Garris, who would go on to create the Masters of Horror TV series. Quicksilver Highway is notable for being an anthology movie comprised of 2 stories. They were The Body Politic, written by Clive Barker based on a short story of the same name, found in the Books of Blood Volume 4, and the other story, The Chattery Teeth, written by Stephen King. We started this month with a quote from King saying, "I have seen the future of horror, and his name is Clive Barker." This quote from King propelled Barker into the limelight and kickstarted his career. So it's super cool to see a movie derived from both authors. Now, there were multiple times when I was a kid that I almost bought this movie. I remember having it in my hand, but I never ended up owning it. I looked online for some decent transfers, but was unable to secure anything over 480p. Luckily, our good friend Retro Analog Entertainment lent me his copy, and all the footage from this movie is provided by him. So make sure you go to his channel and subscribe. He puts out some amazing work. Thanks, Steve. By the way, we just worked on a project together called Horrible Horror, and I think you all will really like it. Okay, shameless plugs over. When Quicksilver Highway originally aired on television, King's segment The Chattery Teeth was aired first, followed by Barker's The Body Politic. When Fox put the movie on DVD for the home market, they required the segments to be switched. Director Mick Garris was upset with the change, as he thought The Body Politic had more of a climactic ending. The 2 segments are loosely connected with a wraparound story about a traveling storyteller who tells horrific tales, named Quicksilver, played by Christopher Lloyd. Since I'm reviewing the home media release, let's start with Clive Barker's The Body Politic. At a small carnival, a man goes around pickpocketing random people. He hides in a tent until the police trail cools down. He meets Quicksilver, who tells him a tale about how important hands can be. Does the artist create the art, or does the artist's hands create the art? Talking about the importance of our mind being able to control our hands with precision. The cautionary tale starts with one of the best surgeons around. As you can imagine, this takes a lot of precise skill with the hands, but his hands suddenly start acting up, dropping the scalpel randomly and throwing it. Wait, is that John Landis?
Late night, Dr. George?
And Clive Barker!
What did I ever do to you?
Cool! While driving home, the doctor's hands try to swerve into traffic. He's terrified that his hands are acting on their own, and he confronts his psychiatrist about it. It's a scary premise. I mean, after all, we're just a brain controlling a big giant meat suit with nerves. What happens if we lose control? What happens if we get stuck just up here? At night, the hands talk to each other about how they want to be freed from the body. The right hand is the Messiah and will lead all hands to freedom.
I am the Messiah. You must raise an army, then come and fetch me.
One night, the hands attack the wife, killing her, and then they drag the doctor down the stairs. The right hand cuts off the left one, freeing it from the body. The left hand goes around the hospital talking to everyone else's hands. All the hands get a mind of their own and release themselves from their human counterparts. Remember, this is 1997, and while the green screen hand looks good, the CGI ones don't hold up. Will the army of hands lead a revolution, or can the doctor stop them all before it's too late? In the Stephen King segment, a newlywed couple break down on the desert highway. The husband leaves to go find help and the wife stays in the car to wait. While she waits, Quicksilver pulls up and offers her some food in his trailer. He tells the tale of the chattery teeth. A salesman is on his way home through a strong desert windstorm. He needs to make it back today for his son's birthday. While driving through the storm, he nearly hits a hitchhiker. The salesman has to stop at the gas station for gas and finds novelty chattering teeth that no longer work. The store owner ends up giving it to him for free. While returning to his van, he sees the hitchhiker who asks for a ride. After some contemplation, the salesman agrees. Well, this might not have been a good idea since the hitchhiker has a knife and isn't afraid to use it. Will the salesman make it home alive, and what purpose do the teeth serve? Quicksilver Highway was conceived as almost a prelude to the Masters of Horror. It was intended to be a series starring Quicksilver, who would tell a horror tale each episode. Fox wasn't in love with the idea and decided to make it a TV movie instead. And Quicksilver Highway is pretty good. It's not great, but for a made-for-TV horror movie, it's a lot of fun. There's some great camera work, especially in the body politic section. I love the shot of the knife and enjoy the hospital scene where the doctor talks to his hand. Both segments are strong, but I personally prefer the body politic segment more. It's not scary, but it's dumb fun. A bunch of killer hands wanting a revolution? Sign me up! The chattery teeth is more tense for sure, but it never really goes big. I recommend Quicksilver Highway even though it's a made-for-TV movie and not solely a Barker project. Now if you're a fan of Barker, you'll be super excited to see his cameo. I know I was.
What did I ever do to you?
1990 marked the beginning of Clive Barker's production company, Seraphim. Seraphim was to bring Clive Barker's work to a global audience as he explored his imagination through multiple media, including film, television, novels, comics, poetry, theater, photography, and painting. This now defunct production company lasted well over 2 decades, and getting information on it has been a challenge. I had to use the Wayback Machine just to get a better understanding of it. While many film projects tried to take life under the Seraphim banner, only 3 came to fruition. That's Nightbreed, Lord of Illusions, and the movie we're looking at today, 2002's Saint Sinner. In the late 90s, Seraphim Films signed a deal with 20th Century Fox to make movies for them. Barker had the understanding that Fox wanted to make movies or TV shows based on his work, and while there was plenty of talking, there was no movie making. Barker had drafted 6 scripts under Fox, but nothing came from it. Barker entered the new millennium with very low expectations, but there was one company that actually wanted to make movies, and that was the Sci-Fi Channel, back when they spelled their name like this. Barker took one of his ideas that he developed at Fox and offered it to the Sci-Fi Channel. The initial idea had potential to become an ongoing series. That idea was Saint Sinner. Not to be confused though with the Marvel comic of the same name, created by some dude named Clive Barker? Shoot. I'm a horror movie review channel, and now I gotta talk about Marvel comics? I know nothing about comics. Let's give it a shot. In 1993, Clive Barker worked with Marvel Comics to create Razorline. Barker created the titles, premises, and lead characters for 4 Razorline publications: Ecto Kid, Hokum and Hex, Hyperkind, and Saint Sinner. Some were superhero based and others were supernatural based. Now when an Avenger fan asks me my favorite Marvel character, I can at least give them an interesting answer. Now, the Saint Sinner comic and the Saint Sinner movie have nothing in common except for the name. Barker had this to say about his Marvel comic experience: I was always disappointed with the way that Marvel handled that entire line of comics, particularly Saint Sinner. I thought that's a waste of a good title. So, almost a decade later in 2002, Barker reworked the idea with the help of the Sci-Fi Channel, and the $4 million Saint Sinner movie was made. Is Saint Sinner worth tracking down? Let's find out. Saint Sinner starts in the early 1800s, where monk in training Tomas is a total baddie. He watches women seductively, lays half naked in the fields, sneaks into forbidden places, and calls his brother baby.
Trust me, Gregory, this is good.
I'm so glad they're sticking to time-accurate dialogue. It makes it much more immersive. Tomas's brother is a holy one and likes to follow the rules, but Tomas is constantly getting into trouble. Tomas makes them go to the basement depository where they keep the hidden holy items. They find the Wheel of Time, but have to hide when 2 older monks walk in. The 2 older monks are carrying a super evil box, and of course, this piques the interest of Tomas. Once the older ones leave, Tomas and his brother check out the evil box. Inside is a marble orb. Well, the orb attacks the brother, grows big, and rips off his arm. The orb was actually 2 trapped succubi, and they used the Wheel of Time to go to the future. Tomas is marked with the holy dagger, and it seals his destiny. He now must stop the succubi. Tomas's brother dies, and is now up to Tomas to travel to the future and put an end to these demons. In the future, we follow Tomas and a female cop as they hunt down the evil sisters. The evil sisters are sucking the life from every man they meet. Can Tomas and the cop save the day, or will the evil sisters give birth to more evil? I fully expected Saint Sinner to suck. I mean, it's a made-for-TV movie from the Sci-Fi Channel that I've never heard of. But you know what? Saint Sinner's surprisingly watchable. The story was engaging enough, characters were decently fleshed out, pacing was fine, decent enough gore. If you keep in mind that this was a made-for-TV sci-fi movie, then it should exceed expectations. I guess I was a bit annoyed by the blue tint that was present throughout. Just kind of made the movie a little lifeless, you know? But overall, Saint Sinner is inoffensive and a pretty easy hour and 20 minutes. It's not the worst Barker adaptation. Next in Barker's film timeline would be the 2 Master of Horror episodes. But like I said, Heckle's Tale would not be able to be shown on YouTube without getting demonetized, so those reviews may come down the line. On Thursday, we'll be boarding the train. The Midnight Meat Train. In 1993, Bernard Rose, the director of Candyman, started to write the sequel to Candyman. Rose loved Clive Barker's The Midnight Meat Train so much that he wanted to add elements of it in Candyman 2 and merge the stories. Barker was hesitant at first, but let Rose continue with the script. When Barker finally read the screenplay for Candyman 2 mixed with The Midnight Meat Train, Barker loved it, but thought there wasn't a lot of Candyman. It felt like The Midnight Meat Train, so why not just make The Midnight Meat Train and let someone else work on Candyman 2. This adaptation of The Midnight Meat Train would never make it beyond a script. It would eventually fade into the night and would soon be forgotten by everyone. Everyone but Clive Barker. Barker loved The Midnight Meat Train. It was the second story found within the Books of Blood anthology that put Barker on the map. He always thought it would make for a great movie. Outside of sequels, ones that Barker had little to do with, the mid to late 90s and early 2000s were rough for Barker's film career. Yes, he was focusing on many other artistic endeavors during this time, like writing, painting, producing, making a few made-for-television movies, among many other activities, but Barker yearned to bring his stories back to the big screen. Barker formed a new production company in early 2005, the Midnight Picture Show, with fellow producer Jorge Saralegui. Jorge Saralegui was coming off being the producer for some pretty big films like Queen of the Damned and The Time Machine. The Midnight Picture Show intended to produce 2 horror films a year, most of which would be adapted from Clive Barker's short stories found within the Books of Blood. And what story should be adapted and made into a movie first? The story that helped shape Barker's career. The story which was almost made into a movie before. The Midnight Meat Train. Barker once took a trip to New York in the early 80s and got on the subway alone. He didn't understand the New York subway system. Stop after stop, he sat on the train. He eventually got to the end of the line and got off on a random stop. Not a single person was around. He was alone in the dark subway system. He was so spooked and scared, and in that moment, he knew he could make a story from this. The Midnight Meat Train found funding with Lakeshore Films and a distributor in Lionsgate. Filming was to start in October of 2005, but due to complications, a new director had to be found, and filming was pushed back to 2006. Enter director Ryuhei Kitamura. Ryuhei Kitamura was a Japanese director who directed many Japanese films, including Godzilla Final Wars, which is such a guilty pleasure Godzilla movie. It's balls to the walls with non-stop entertainment. Kitamura was a huge fan of Barker's work, especially The Midnight Meat Train. As soon as the Books of Blood anthology was localized in Japan, he read it right away. Barker admired Kitamura's vision and passion. Kitamura brought a lot of himself onto the screen and was a joy to work with. Being a producer who had full trust in his director, Barker was happily in service of the vision of Ryuhei Kitamura. And a stellar director wasn't the only thing going for this project. This is a star-studded cast. Benny Jones, Leslie Bibb, Brooke Shields, and that one guy that everyone seems to love. He's some sexy stud that's in like all these movies. What was his name again?
Bradley Cooper?
No.
Ted Raimi?
Yes! Ted freaking Raimi! The Dreamboat.
My name is Ted Raimi, and I play Randall. I reach an unfortunate end.
Oh, and there's also this no-named niche actor by the name of Bradley Cooper. Am I the only person who knows of this dude? With one of Barker's best stories on hand, a cooperative visionary director in place, $15 million at their disposal, and an all-star cast set, how could Midnight Meat Train fail? Well, it did fail. Miserably, but maybe not at the fault of Barker. This is the story of the Midnight Meat Train. The Midnight Meat Train starts with a man waking up from a nap on a subway car. As he walks forward, he slips in a big puddle of blood. The camera pulls back and we see murders are happening in the adjacent car. And opening titles. The opening is great at establishing the mood and letting fans know that they're watching a balls to the walls horror flick. I love the setting and the real blood, but there's fake blood splurting and it looks rough. The fake CGI blood only gets worse from here. We meet Leon, a photographer who listens to police scanners all day, goes to the scenes of a crime and takes pictures and then sells them to the paper. He wants to do more with his life and wants to take photos of the city and capture the true essence of it. And what city is it, I hear you asking? Originally, the story took place in New York, and they were going to film in New York and Montreal, but it became too expensive, so they filmed in LA instead. In the movie, it's an unnamed city to add to the mystery, so it kinda works. Through a mutual friend, Leon is introduced to the owner of a high-class art institute. The owner basically commissions Leon to capture pictures of the true heart of the city.
The next time you find yourself at the heart of the city, stay put, keep shooting.
Leon's girlfriend is super supportive of him, and they have a great dynamic together. Later that night, Leon can't sleep, so he goes to take photos and manages to get to the subway station. There he meets a woman who's being harassed by a gang of no-good jerks. Leon stays put and continues taking pictures, but eventually helps the lady out. Once the gang realizes that they're on camera, they run off. Leon watches as the woman gets on the train. On the train, the woman is attacked by a man in a suit. If we go frame by frame, you can tell that a lot of the impact was done in post-production, and it looks terrible. The next day, Leon finds out that the woman from the photos has gone missing. Since he has photos of her, he takes them to the police to hopefully give them some leads. The police are super sus and of no help. The art lady loves the new photos, but wants more of them. So Leon continues to go to the subway at night and notices a big man in a suit using the train. Through some sleuthing, he finds out that the man was on the train the very same night the woman went missing. He begins to stalk this man, and he believes that this man is the one killing everyone. And he's right! This is Mahogany. And this mysterious guy kills everyone on these late night train rides, prepares them like dead cattle, hangs them from meat hooks, and then transports the bodies somewhere. Where do these bodies end up? Who or what has been eating the meat? And why is this being done? How far does this rabbit hole go? If you haven't seen The Midnight Meat Train, I suggest you do. I wasn't the biggest fan of the film when it first came out. I really tried to like it back then, but after watching it for this review, after a decade of not seeing it, I loved it this time around. Yeah, the CGI and blood is all terrible. This looks like a video game. The exterior of the train is also all CGI. Outside of that, the movie's pretty great. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's one of Barker's best. For everyone who has seen it, let's pretend this is meat and spoil the heck out of this one. The genius of the story and the movie is what is done with the bodies. This whole time you want the answer, and when you finally get the answer, about 1 million more pressing questions pop up. Mahogany is but a pawn, a mere catalyst to progress the story and themes, much like the Cenobites in Hellraiser and the masked slasher in Nightbreed. Many fans will come for Mahogany, but that's just the surface level attraction. Mahogany kills people on the train and prepares their meat for an ancient breed of monsters that live below the city. These monsters have been around before the beginning of mankind, and a secret society has been built to keep these beasts fed to maintain balance. We know the train conductor and the police captain are in on it. This has been going on for thousands of years. The beasts mark the ones that are worthy like they do to Leon. Once Leon kills Mahogany, he is the one to take over. I love this story so much. You think the answers are right in front of you if you just dig down a little bit deeper. And once you dig down and you get to the climax, there's a big, giant, bottomless hole of even more questions, and the story just pushes you head first into the bottomless void. I love it. In a time when horror movies wanted to be rated PG-13 to appeal to a wider audience, The Midnight Meat Train is unapologetically meant to be an R-rated flick. It's a brutal movie, but the CGI is super dated. Ryu Kitamura didn't really want to use a lot of CGI, but ended up using it a lot. The best and worst death scenes happen in the same scene. Ted Raimi gets a hammer to the back of the head and his eyeball flies out. So dumb and it looks so bad. But then his girlfriend's death is awesome. She crawls on the bloody floor and then it cuts to her POV, which is actually made with a head-mounted camera. He hits her a few times and then the camera goes rolling and we see her body. The camera pulls back from her eye and we see her decapitated head. Now I hate the mold of the head, it looks really rough and I don't like the CGI blink, but the idea and execution of this sequence is so imaginative and awesome. During filming, there were some learning curves for director Kitamura. The Japanese film industry doesn't have any laws or regulations regarding how long you can film. Ryuhei Kitamura's record was actually 48 hours of straight filming in Japan with no lunch. He was not used to these 12-hour American workdays, but his crew was fast, so he was happy. Kitamura had to fight studio execs for longer shots. The studio execs and most Hollywood brass want coverage, and hate long shots. Ryuhei Kitamura jokingly says producers always want options. Barker thinks that the coverage gives producers more opportunities to screw with their work. Once the movie was in post-production, the heads at Lionsgate changed, and Barker and crew no longer found internal support. Originally, it was to be a March release, but the date was pushed back without communication. Eventually, the film would be released in August of 2008, but not to the 3,000 theaters that was promised. Instead, it got released to only 100 theaters, and these theaters were dollar theaters, meaning that the movie had no way to make back its budget. Nothing was communicated to Barker or the director. Barker was furious. He had already worked on treatments for the Midnight Meat Train 2 and 3, thinking that the first one would be a success. The Midnight Meat Train made less than $100,000 at the domestic box office due to Lionsgate's brass screwing Barker and his team over. There was no marketing, no push, no theaters. This crushed Barker as he thought Kitamura made a great movie. It was different than his own vision, but that's what he admired about it. And Barker wasn't the only one who liked this movie. Guillermo del Toro loved it too and pushed for a nationwide Mexican theatrical release. Guillermo del Toro thought it was a beautiful film and pleaded with the producers to get it released overseas. The Midnight Meat Train ended up bringing in $3.5 million worldwide. And I agree. I think the Midnight Meat Train is pretty great. I love the cinematography, physical gore, performances, story, and setting. Some moments don't work, the CGI is bad, music isn't great, but overall, this one is a lot of fun. Feels like there was an actual fingerprint attached to this movie. It feels like someone's unique vision, which is decently rare for a Barker adaptation. Even after the studio's interference, Barker still believed that the Midnight Meat Train would eventually find its audience, and I like to think that it has. Most of Clive Barker's stories can be summed up pretty easily. His stories typically have someone or something unlocking a fantasy world, a world adjacent to our own yet filled with supernatural elements. Examples of this include saying Candyman's name in the mirror 5 times, unlocking the puzzle box in Hellraiser, or stumbling upon the lost remains of Midian, a place where the monsters go in Nightbreed. These are magical stories, supernatural ones, fantasy stories. Barker was aware of his influence on impressionable youth and disliked movies and media portraying madmen on the loose, as it could perpetuate violence within his community.
If you are talking about a movie which is solely based upon psychos on the loose, for instance, in which you take vulnerable teenagers and you just kill them one by one with machetes or whatever else, I think that's unhealthy. I try, with one exception, in all my fiction, the stories are based in something supernatural or fantastical. I don't write psycho on the loose stories.
So, in all of his stories, he had elements of the supernatural, fantasy worlds in which the darkness arrives. He was a fan of using strong, fantastical metaphors to tell his tales of the macabre. But there was one story early on that took place in the world that we all live in, a story that ditched the supernatural and instead focused and dove in to the depravity of man. That story was found in the Books of Blood Volume 2. That story was Dread. Dread is the only Barker fiction that doesn't have any supernatural elements, but instead plays out more like a madman on the loose kind of story. It's actually one of my favorite Barker stories due to that fact. There were talks about making Dread a movie starting way back in 1999 through 2002. Fox was seriously considering making Dread, but if you saw my review on the made-for-TV movie Clive Barker Saint Sinner, then you know that Fox would rather spend time talking about making movies from Clive Barker's work rather than actually making them. As the deal with Fox fell through, Barker went on to form his own production company, The Midnight Picture Show, with aspirations to make at least 8 full-length feature films based on the stories found within the Books of Blood anthology. This was finally it. After years of being stuck in production hell, Barker and crew finally had a chance to make the movies they wanted. Barker was executive producer and had final say on all scripts and films, but mostly let the different artists do their own take on his stories. This wave was to start with the Midnight Meat Train in 2008, and then Book of Blood and Dread were to follow in 2009. Many more films were planned. So how did this stretch end up panning out? With Dread being the last film based off Clive Barker's work for well over a decade, it's safe to say that this effort was a complete failure, but maybe not for the reasons you think. Let's dive in to Dread. Dread focuses on shy and reserved Stephen Grace, a film student at the university who meets Quaid, a philosophy student at the same school. The two hit it off. Quaid is a bit abrasive, but there's a strength in him that lures Stephen to him. Quaid is obsessed with fear, but more importantly, dread. He proposes to do a fear study as a final project. With Stephen filming, they could make a heck of a film. The focus will be finding out what people are afraid of. When Quaid was just 6 years old, an axe-wielding madman broke into his house and killed his parents. Check out the sound design in this scene.
This is your mother. Your father.
Haunting and gruesome. And the idea of all that's left of your parents are the blood that is spilt is a grisly one. I love this scene. Due to his childhood trauma, Quaid now has a fear of axe-wielding madmen, an obsession. He has nightmares every night about it, and he thinks by having a fear study and living through someone else's fear vicariously, he can isolate his own internal fears and get rid of them. Stephen and Quaid enlist the help of film editor Cheryl, another student. Together they make flyers and begin their research. At first, Quaid isn't happy with the results. Fear of spiders? That's not real dread. Cheryl decides to open up on camera and a real breakthrough happens. Cheryl talks about how when she was a kid, her father worked at a meat packing factory. When he would return at home at night, he stunk of raw meat, of iron from the blood of cattle. He would sneak into her room at night and do very bad things to her. She can't stand meat now. She's a vegetarian, and the thought of meat makes her sick.
That's what I'm talking about. Some f***ing honest-to-God trauma.
Another breakthrough is from Joshua. He was in a car accident as a kid, and for a few years he lost his hearing. Joshua is deathly afraid of becoming deaf again. And here is the biggest difference between the short story and the movie. In the book, Stephen was the one who was afraid of being deaf again, but a new backstory was written for him for the film. This sets up a very different ending, but both endings are fantastic. I don't think the book's ending would translate as well on screen, so I'm all for this change. And quick side note, Barker was actually deaf for a brief period as a child, so this story hits very close to his heart. Basically, as the story progresses, Quaid begins to lose himself. His nightmares of an axe-wielding murderer are becoming less frequent, so he wants to continue with the fear study, but he wants to push it to the next level. And Quaid is slowly becoming a madman. He wants to push people to their absolute limits. He harasses a girl with large birthmarks on the right side of her body until she takes a bath in bleach and uses steel wool to try to scrape away her imperfections. He shoots Joshua in the ears to make him deaf again, and the worst is what he does to Cheryl. He locks her in a room with a well-cooked steak. She's trapped in this room as he films her. She tries to get out, and at first she thinks that she can outlast him, but days and days begin to tick by. She won't touch the meat, but she is slowly getting hungrier and hungrier. The more she waits, the more ripe and rancid the meat becomes. At what point will her will break? This meat scene is part of the climax of the movie, and of course studio execs hated it. They thought the scene was unrelatable and that it wasn't very climactic. When the movie was eventually shown at theaters, the meat scene was all audiences could talk about. They raved about it. Turns out that studio execs don't know anything. Shocking, I know. The meat scene is one of the most memorable Barker moments and the best scene of the movie. Will Cheryl break and eat the meat? What will happen to Stephen and the ones that Quaid has wronged? And will Quaid ever free himself of Dread? I love Dread, both the story and the movie. Is it a perfect Barker adaptation? No, but it retains much of the themes and is a kick-butt flick. Performances are all top-notch. This is seriously a great cast. First-time director and longtime Barker collaborator Anthony DiBlasi does a great job too. I like what he added to the story and I don't mind the changes. I love how personal and claustrophobic he makes the film. He loves his close-ups. Now, I'm not a fan of the color grading though. The contrast is through the roof. Anything that has any kind of light source on it is blown out, and sometimes people look like they have jaundice. I also hate the blue tint that they use outdoors. There's also a few scenes where the 180-degree film rule becomes merely a recommendation. And what's with this crappy frame rate and shaky camera? I hate this. And yes, while I do complain, there are parts that are praiseworthy too. I love the fixed camera on the axe as it travels up the steps. I also love how they infuse a bit of color into some of the shots. Sound design is great too. I love the muffled, deafening sounds.
Good. You're awake. I was getting tired of waiting. Can you hear me?
Music is mostly comprised of different contemporary bands, but it fits the mood. Dread is a great movie and one of Barker's best adaptations, definitely top 5 or 6. I also love the idea that monsters aren't always born, sometimes they're made. And in Dread, monsters are made. Barker and director Anthony DiBlasi had plans to make Pig Blood Blues in the next few months following the release of Dread, but unfortunately the failure of the Book of Blood, Midnight Meat Train, and Dread put an end to the Midnight Picture Show and any hopes of adapting Barker's work for the next decade. It's a real shame, as it feels like studio execs yet again screwed over Barker and his team. I really thought Barker and the Midnight Picture Show were onto something, but at the end of the day, money talks. It sucks that we haven't gotten more of Barker's adaptations.
Turns out Clive Barker had new Books of Blood ideas that hadn't been published.
At the beginning of October, I reviewed Clive Barker's Book of Blood from 2009 to kickstart the month-long Clive Barker retrospective. I reviewed every film adaptation from his work. There were some bad movies and some masterpieces along the way. We are finishing up this month by looking at Hulu's Books of Blood from 2020, currently the final Clive Barker film. And it's not just a remake of the 2009 film. I mean, sort of, it kind of is. It's partially a remake. It's an anthology horror film, which is actually really smart. The Books of Blood was an anthology of short stories housed under different volumes. It only makes sense to make a few short films and combine them into one movie. Barker and director Brian Braga went to Hulu and Fox and pitched the idea of an anthology TV series to air. Barker had a rough stint with Fox in the late 90s and early 2000s, where while being under contract with Fox, Fox made exactly 0 of the 6 scripts Barker made for them. So leave it up to Fox to screw Barker and crew over yet again. Instead of a TV series, they settled with an anthology horror flick, and if it did well enough, maybe they would consider doing more. So finally, Fox got to make something from Clive Barker's work. Only took 20 plus years. So what stories should they adapt? I mean, the Books of Blood is one of the most influential collection of horror tales ever released, universally loved and adored. Well, they decided to adapt the short story, The Book of Blood, which I guess makes sense. Yes, there already was an adaptation, but it's such an important story and the catalyst to all of Barker's work, so fine. But what about the other 2 stories? Do we finally get an adaptation of the Pig Blood Blues, or maybe an ambitious take on In the Hills, The Cities? No. Instead of pulling from one of the classics, director Brian Braga made up some new stories of his own, with the aid of Clive Barker. You're telling me that they named the film after the Books of Blood, but don't adapt any new stories from this incredible collection? What's the point? If you wanted to adapt new stories, that's fine, but then don't tease us with the Books of Blood title. And while I love Clive Barker, these new stories just don't do it for me. They don't feel like Clive Barker. They feel like, I assume, Brian Braga. Maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like Barker's voice and vision has either drastically changed, or these new stories didn't come solely from Barker.
In this movie are new Books of Blood stories that Clive came up with, and I went off and wrote.
Okay. Enough harping on it. Let's go in with a clear mind and find out if Hulu's Books of Blood is any good or not. While there are 3 stories, they are all interwoven together. They take place in the same universe. You'll see familiar locations among the stories, and even some of the characters will interact with one another. We start with a wraparound segment, which is also part of the 3rd and final story. Bennett tracks down a librarian and wants his money back. The librarian doesn't have it, but he tells about a book of blood which could be worth millions. Bennett kills the librarian and goes in search for the book of blood with his partner. Cue intro. The first story is Jenna. It's about a girl who's dealing with some mental problems. Her parents aren't the most supportive, so she decides to steal some money and run away. As she runs away, she feels like she's being followed. So she decides to stop at an Airbnb for a night or 2 so she can hide out. The Airbnb owners are super nice. There's an older lady and her husband who take care of the house with a nice little garden in the back. Jenna meets Gavin, a young man who's also staying at the Airbnb. The two instantly become friends. That night, Jenna has a terrible dream, which is actually fairly creepy. But then it ends with some terrible CGI cockroaches. In the morning, she feels better, but some things are off. Gavin didn't show up for their coffee date, and the strange man is hot on her trail. What evil lurks in the shadows of the Airbnb? Who is this mystery man, and what horrors await Jenna? The second story found within this anthology is actually a pretty familiar story. It's basically the Book of Blood. It's super similar to the 2009 movie, but with a few differences. Mary is a paranormal investigator who likes to debunk people who claim they have a gift. She is a mother, and her son Miles dies of leukemia.
We just go to sleep, you know? I'm awfully tired.
One of Mary's students, Simon, says he can talk to her son Miles from beyond the grave. Mary sets up an investigation to prove him wrong, and uh-oh. Turns out that he wasn't faking it. Mary all of a sudden believes in the supernatural and believes that her son is still with her. And get this, she starts a sexual relationship with her student, Simon. Here's a small little note for all those teachers out there. Don't do that! Well, some twists and turns happen, and Simon's skin eventually becomes a vessel for the dead to write their stories. And that's where all the stories from the Books of Blood anthology are found. On Simon's skin, etched from ghostly apparitions. If you've read the short story or have seen the 2009 movie, then not much has changed. Sure, Mary has a child now, but outside of that, it remains mostly intact. It's funny, but the skin effects look so much worse here. I think the 2009 version still holds up in that regard. What version is best? The short story, duh. But which movie does it better? Both are good in certain ways and pretty bad in others. The practical effects, characters, atmosphere, and climax do hit better in the 2009 version, but I enjoy the colors, pacing, and CGI more in the 2020 version. Both have their pros and their cons, and if you combine the positives of both and put them into one movie, that would be the definitive version. I will say, the 2009 version is probably better. 2009 may be boring at times, but at least it didn't have cringe moments like the 2020 version. Like, look at this. That is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. It makes me laugh out loud and roll my eyes at the same time. So bad. The third story is the wraparound story and is the shortest tale by a significant amount. Bennett and his friend look for the Book of Blood in a run-down haunted town. Half the segment is them just saying, man.
Wow, man. Generation of zombies, man. Whatever, man. Fucked up, man. Who's that, man? Man, there was a woman, man. Where you going, man? You praying, man? My mom, man. She wants me to come with her, man. Man, it's a happy place, man. You're right, man.
Now do you understand when I say that the movie doesn't feel like it has Clive Barker's voice? It doesn't feel like Barker wrote this. It doesn't feel like him at all, man. The car randomly breaks down, his partner goes into the church to kill himself, and then Bennett walks to Mary's house. He meets Mary and the Book of Blood, and Mary threatens that his story will be on the skin next. What horrors await Bennett? Honestly, not much, because he has like 2 more minutes of screen time. That's it. It's pathetic. The film then circles back to the first story, and it's over. Hulu's Books of Blood is a mess. Barker has only ever written one story that had no supernatural elements. His stories deal with the fantastic, the mystical, fantasy worlds that represent real-life metaphors. So it's weird that the biggest and longest story, Jenna, has 0 supernatural elements. Just doesn't feel like Barker. The third segment doesn't even feel like a complete story either, it's so short. The only tale that feels like Barker is Miles, and that's because it's based on the Book of Blood, and even so, it feels a bit removed from Barker's vision. I will say this, technically, the movie is fine. If it didn't have Barker's name attached, the movie would be typical modern horror schlock. Bad jump scares, generic soundtrack, and overwritten messes. Performances are good, it looks good, it's just bland. It feels exactly like every other generic horror film nowadays. Barker has such a unique voice when writing. His concepts are original and solely his own. You can tell when it's a Barker story or movie. There's a romance to it, an underlying meaning, personal yet abstract, and fantastical themes throughout. Hulu's Books of Blood is void of all of it. It's a shame that Hulu's Books of Blood misses the mark on what makes Barker, Barker. I started this month-long retrospective in hopes of finding out more about one of my favorite creative minds, and I've discovered so much along the way and have gained a much bigger appreciation for the future of horror. Barker caught lightning in a bottle in the mid-80s with the Books of Blood and tried to ride that wave ever since. None of his work outside of the 80s even came close to the success he had in the mid-80s, but I don't think that was entirely his fault. In the film world, Barker had been screwed over time and time again by studio execs and people thinking that they know way more than he did. Some of his best work was tinkered with until it was no longer recognizable. Like Stephen King once said, Barker is not merely good, he is great. And not great in the way mainstream critics are liable to appreciate for a good many years. And I think the mainstream is still beginning to learn the brilliance of Barker. I'm so glad that I got to take this time to do a Clive Barker retrospective and share it with all of you, because Clive Barker has played such an important role in my life. Now, I was never the biggest reader as a kid. I read Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and a few Goosebumps, but the one person who got me to really read was Clive Barker. I discovered his work in middle school and it literally changed my life. And if you don't believe me, listen to this. I started seeing a girl in 2016, and on our third date, we went to the Barnes & Nobles. She loved reading, but I was never the biggest fan. She loved it when people would give her recommendations, and I wanted to relate to her and show her that I wasn't some dumb dude, so I bought the Books of Blood anthology on the spot. Yes, now I have 2 copies, and I asked her to read it if she wanted to. I did this, number 1, to try to impress her, but more importantly, number 2, to ensure another date, one where she could return me the book. Needless to say, we're married now, and without Clive Barker, I don't know. I might not have gotten the chance to marry the most wonderful person I've ever met. So thank you to Clive Barker, and thank you to anyone who's watched this far.
Thank you very much.
After all of this, the ups and the downs of looking through Barker's career, I can confidently say this. Barker doesn't just have the goods, he is the goods. Happy Halloween, everyone.
At heart, I'm a writer and a painter. I'm a writer and a painter who got lucky and got to make some movies.
Come with me into the great beyond.
We have such sights to show you.
Without breaking a line, it takes you from the tiny to the immense. It takes you from the inside to the outside. It takes you from the imagination to the real. And I stress, without breaking a line. And that's what I'm trying to do in my fiction. I'm trying to take a reader by the hand, take him or her here, and without breaking the surface of their known reality and violating their understanding of what the real is, slowly coax them, seduce them into a place which is richer and darker and more mythic and more full of echoes and mysteries and profound innocence and, yes, profound guilt and evil. And finally, into oneness, which is right at the heart of things.
Jesus wept.
Because it has some power to change the world. I'm not interested in art if it can't change the world.